Let's set up and let's start. So we talk about migrating the data, we talk about securing the data, and now we want to talk about putting this everything not only on cloud or also do much more. So now we're gonna have a brief introduction for all of you who are here for our Atlas, which is called our Intelligent Data Platform. And it's gonna be covered by our solutions architect from Frankfurt office, who's not only solutions architect, but he's also our master and champion of the cube speeding. So if you have any question about speed cubing, here is a Philipp Weyer, and welcome on stage.
Yeah, thank you. I don't have one with me, so I can't show it. All right, so hello everyone, and welcome to MongoDB Atlas introduction. As Ola mentioned, I'm a solutions architect at MongoDB, located here in Frankfurt. And obviously this talk is going to be about MongoDB Atlas, but before we dive right into what it's all about, I'd like to share 2 quotes that I found in recent reports that I find quite insightful. So the first one says that by 2025, 175 zettabytes of data will be stored in databases. Now this is up from 33 zettabytes in 2018, and it just gives you an idea of how much data companies are actually gathering, and they wouldn't do it if they didn't have any value in it. The second one says that 75% of all databases will be on a cloud platform by 2022. Now granted, this is not the most up-to-date data. This is from a 2019 Gartner report, but it just gives you an overview of the general situation in the market. And if you ask me, I think those two are correlated. So on one hand, companies are gathering more and more data and getting value from it, and they realize they need to move to cloud platforms to do all of this. And on the other hand, they are moving to cloud platforms and are realizing how much more data they can actually gather. So companies are realizing that the cloud really unlocks never-before-seen potentials in their data. And this is on one hand from the global scale. So you can spin up your applications and databases all over the world, wherever you want, whenever you want, at a moment's notice. Every single thing about the stack is fully automated as well. So you have tools and services to do everything that you need to do, fully automated, integrating into your services. And finally, you only have one security model to manage. So with every service that you use, you also have tools in the cloud to make your data secure while also making it available. So you benefit from all of these. So in this talk, I would like to talk about how MongoDB Atlas really fits into that vision of the move to the cloud. So I want to touch on the ease of use, so regarding the deployment, deploying a MongoDB in the cloud, loading some data into it, connecting to it, and working with the data. Also, I want to touch on the flexibility that the cloud offers you, so with the scaling and availability potential and also the automation aspect. And then also, since we say that MongoDB Atlas isn't just MongoDB as a service in the cloud, it's really a complete data platform, so we have loads of tools and services built around it that make your life as a developer extremely easy and efficient. So when we think about deploying a database on-prem, there are really 2 ways to go about it. So one thing is you can do everything manually. So you install the operating system, you install the database, you touch all of the config files yourself, but that's very tedious. Now there are tools that automate a lot of stuff regarding this. So for example, the MongoDB Ops Manager is something that you can use to automate the deployment of the MongoDB. You can configure monitoring, backups, everything is done for you. But there are always going to be some things that you can't automate away. So the first very obvious thing is no amount of automations automate away the fact that you need to provision the hardware. So you need to buy the service, you need to set them up and everything. On top of that, you also need to configure the connectivity so that all of the network requirements are fit and that every server can communicate with each other. And also adhering to all of your security controls that you might have defined. So your firewall rules, your services that you have on-prem to make everything secure. You are responsible for the resiliency of your database and also that, so you need to set up fail-safes when the database goes down. You need to ensure that there's enough capacity to accommodate your database as your application grows. And finally, the database isn't going to be the only thing you have on-prem. So you might have other niche databases, other applications. You need to build and manage the architecture to glue everything together, and you're responsible to do that in an available way as well. So with MongoDB Atlas, we really try to eliminate all of that friction by going to the cloud and offering you all of the services that the cloud provides to give you a seamless experience, both from a management but also from a developer perspective. So in summary, MongoDB Atlas is going to enable you to build better apps faster by, on one hand, building a unify a fragmented developer experience by having loads of tools and capabilities in the same platform, in the same API for you as a developer to use. You have a single operational and security model to manage. So instead of integrating with loads of different services, everything is available with the same API, with your automation tools integrating into it and also your security tools. Furthermore, regarding the data platform aspect, all of the integration of the data is managed for you. So all of the services that we offer, the data is automatically available right in there without you having to build and manage the ETL tools to move the data around. And now, since everything is integrated, we also don't duplicate the data. So the data is centrally in a MongoDB, and you can just access all of the tools and features that you need in order to work with it. So with that being said, I would like to jump into a demo to show you what options you actually have with the deployment of MongoDB Atlas. So the first step would be to create an account for free. So you could scan the QR code and just immediately go to the registration page. It's pretty straightforward. So you just enter email address and password, you get a registration link, you register, and it's going to guide you through the process of creating an organization and a project. Now, if you didn't pull out your phones for this, I would please ask you to pull the phones out to scan this QR code, because with these sessions, we're always looking for feedback. So it would be great if you could just, at the end of the session, tell us what we did well, what we might be able to improve in the future. So these sessions are just better suited for you in the future. All right, so let's jump right in. Now, as a scenario, now, since we're in Frankfurt, it's the banking capital of Germany, we could just imagine that I'm just a fintech startup starting out. I've heard about MongoDB, and I want to try out Atlas and see what MongoDB is all about. So I just want to get started, I want to deploy a database, and I want to work with it. Now, before I do anything in the interface here, I want to tell you that everything can be automated. So every single click that I'm going to do in this user interface can be automated by either an API or by some providers that we offer. For example, the Terraform provider. So you can integrate everything into your existing CI/CD pipelines completely seamlessly. So you don't need to go into the UI and do everything yourselves. Now, just to show you the options, I am going to go into the UI and do it myself. So this is the landing page that you have. So you register, you have an organization and a project, and it's going to show you all of the clusters that you have deployed. Now, there aren't any deployed yet, so let's just go ahead and build a database. Now, the configuration options that you're faced with, first of all, is the cloud provider selection. So even these shared instances, you can deploy in the 3 big cloud provider regions. Now, granted, there's a bit of a limited availability with these regions. But for example, the Frankfurt region, since we're Frankfurt-based, is fully available to us. So let's just go ahead and create a cluster there. Now, this would basically be it. So everything that we need to configure. Now, there are some more options that we have here regarding the hardware. This is all shared hardware, just the storage requirements or specifications that you have change a bit. The M0 is a free forever cluster, so you just can leave it running and it's free forever. The other ones are a bit more expensive, but still very inexpensive. So with this, let's just go ahead and create a cluster. So MongoDB Atlas is going to take this configuration, go to the AWS region, and deploy the shared instance in the cloud provider region that we specified. Now, Atlas also sees that I don't have a username and password specified yet, so we can just go ahead and configure those immediately as well in order to be able to authenticate to our database. So we can just auto-generate a secure password and create the user. And MongoDB Atlas is going to distribute this user information to all of the clusters that we have running, so you can immediately authenticate to that. The second important option here is the network connectivity. By default, all of the clusters that you deploy are completely locked up. So only the IP addresses that you whitelist are allowed to connect to the cluster. So here there are 2 options, my local environment or a cloud environment. Since this is just a local laptop, let's just go ahead with my local environment. I'm going to add my current IP address, and Atlas is going to distribute this network information so I can connect to the cluster from this laptop now. So we can finish and close. We can go to databases. And now we can see that the shared cluster is actually configured and fully available to us. So with these shared instances, it actually takes just 15 to 20 seconds to have a fully featured MongoDB running in the cloud provider region of your choosing, and you can just go ahead and use it as you want. So I would also like to show you what that would look like. So to load a sample data set into the database, connect to it with the MongoDB shell, and show you some very basic commands to explore your data set. Now, since loading data takes a couple of minutes, I recorded this session for you, so we can see what this would look like here. Now, when we go ahead, we can see that on the 3 buttons to the right of the cluster name, we can select this and say load a sample data set. What this does is it takes roughly 350 megabytes of data with different databases and collections and loads it into your database. It took roughly 8 minutes here, so I sped this up for you, so we don't have to look at the spinning wheel there. And once it's done, it's going to tell you that the sample data set is successfully loaded. And now you can just connect to the database and use the data. So you can hit connect. We're going to select the MongoDB shell here. And from this, I already have the MongoDB shell installed. It's going to offer you a connection string. So every cluster that you deploy in MongoDB is going to have a unique connection string that you can just copy. Then you go to your terminal and you can paste it in there. Now the username that we configured before is already integrated into there. So we just need to hit enter and enter the password that we selected before. And after this, you're faced with a command prompt on the database itself already. Now from there, let's explore the data set. So now we're a fintech company, so we're interested in financial use cases. So let's show the databases that are loaded. And in the sample analytics database there's some financial data that might be relevant to us. So let's go ahead and use this. There are multiple collections in there. So this is basically the equivalent to tables in a relational database. Let's just go ahead and see what's in the accounts collection. So we find one document to see what the structure looks like. So it's a financial product use case. You have an account ID, you have some limits, you have the product definition. So let's just imagine we create a new account with a new product type as well. We're going to give the account a new ID that's distinguishable. We enter some limit, as we see in other documents as well. And we're going to say that now we want to have a product that's called credit. Now, after entering this product, we enter it as an array, as with the other use cases up there. And now we want to find this document that we inserted again. So you just go ahead and say find one. And now we're actually going to query on the array field by only providing the string. So MongoDB is smart enough to know that it's an array, and it's going to match every single document in there. Now we find the document that we just inserted. Now, this is a very basic use case of how to work with data in MongoDB. During the day, there are going to be loads more presentations of much more advanced methods to work with your data. It's just to give you an idea of how to get started quickly. Now, again, coming back to the fintech use case, now we're a startup and we think MongoDB is great. We love the features, but now we want to move to production with that. And for this, in order to use all of the features that MongoDB Atlas offers, we need a dedicated instance. So let's go ahead and show what features are available with a dedicated instance. So we go ahead and create. It automatically selects dedicated for us. Now, as with the shared instances, we still have the selection between the 3 cloud providers. We're still selecting AWS, but now we have the full region coverage available to us. So we have a lot more regions where you can deploy the cluster. Now, one important thing to note here is that default deployment in Atlas is always highly available by using something that's called the replica set. So we always, by default, have 3 versions of the data running on 3 different database servers that are connected to each other. So that if one service fails, the other 2 are just going to take over, and it's going to be highly available without interrupting the workload. And this is what's happening in Atlas. Now, you might have noticed the little stars here next to some regions. And this just means that this replica set is going to be deployed in different data centers within that region. So if there's a complete data center outage, so for example, there's an earthquake or flooding, the data center goes down, but your database is still going to be highly available without any interruption to the service at all. But now you might say that being tolerant to one data center outage might not be enough for you, and you want to be even more resilient. So that is something that you can do with this switch here. So when you click on this, it gives you the possibility to add multiple other nodes to the replica set. So either in the same cloud provider in a different region, or even in a completely different cloud provider in a different region. So this gives you the ability to be tolerant to a complete region outage. So if Frankfurt completely goes down with a power outage, or even a cloud provider outage. So if AWS went down and you had nodes on GCP and Azure, you could still serve your workload without any disruption to the service at all. Now, these are the configurations that you have for high availability and tolerance to outages. But now let's think about how our startup is now growing, and now we don't only have service in Frankfurt or in Europe in general, but we're now worldwide. So we can now, or one problem that we're facing now is that with being distributed worldwide and serving customers in Europe, the US, and Asia, we now have the problem about data regulation requirements. So for example, with GDPR, the data from European customers needs to be stored in Europe. So how do we solve this problem with MongoDB Atlas? The answer is quite simple. You just do a global cluster configuration. And this allows you to actually split the data set on your database on multiple shards. So you can deploy one shard in Europe, one shard in the US, and one shard in Asia. And it's going to split the data set. Every one of those shards is also a replica set, so it's highly available. And you're going to be fully compliant with any data regulation requirements that you might have. All right. Now, from this configuration about the general deployment, you now go ahead and select the data or the hardware size that you selected. So it's a dedicated server. There's like this T-shirt system of different tiers that you can select. So it's very similar to any cloud provider that you might know. So for example, if we go to an M50 here, we can see that there's 32 gigabytes of RAM, 160 gigabytes of storage, and 8 CPUs that are available just to you. And now let's think that we deploy this database, and it's the great choice for the moment, but now our application grows. So how do we manage this? There are two ways that Atlas can fight this issue. So the first one is storage scaling. So you have more and more users, more and more transactions coming into your accounts, and the data set itself grows. So if you're in a situation that the 160 gigabytes isn't enough, Atlas is going to look at your disk size, and it's automatically going to deploy a bigger disk as your data size grows. This is all while being highly available, so you don't have any disruption to the service as well. And the second option here is cluster tier scaling. So if you have like a compelling event, so you did like some promotions for your product, and there are loads of people registering for the service, there's a lot more load coming into the database, and the hardware is being choked, so the RAM and the CPUs just aren't enough anymore. And Atlas actually looks at those metrics as well, and then if it's above a certain threshold after a period of time, it automatically can move to a bigger instance size up to a limit that you specify one by one. So while the workload is growing, it's going to scale up the cluster with that workload. And once the workload is dying, it's also going to downscale the cluster as well. So you don't need to worry about anything regarding this scaling issue. Now, from the hardware deployment, you now have some additional settings that you can configure. So the first obvious one is the MongoDB version that we want to select. So by default, it's still 5.0, but we want all of the fancy new features that MongoDB 6.0 offers. So let's go ahead and just do this right now. But you can always go back and change this after the fact without any disruption either. Everything is highly available. Now, another important point is backup. So with the financial data, we can't allow us any loss of the data at all. So the default is cloud backup, where we use the cloud provider's snapshot capabilities to take snapshots at certain scheduled intervals, as you specify. But now we don't even want to use any transactions that happened between snapshots if there's data corruption. And for this, we can turn on continuous cloud backup. So every transaction that comes into the database between snapshots, it's also going to be stored as a backup. So if you have a data corruption and you know when it happened, you can just go back 1 minute before and restore the data to the version it was right before the corruption happened without losing any data. Now, I mentioned the sharding capabilities for the global deployments, but obviously also when you're in a regional setup and your user base grows and you just realize one replica set isn't enough, you can also shard your cluster inside of one region with a single click, deploy as many shards as you want, and you can even do this after the fact, so the data size or the data is going to be split across multiple shards even after the fact. There's a balancer process that's going to do everything for you. Now, with a growing company, we also have business analysts there, and they want to use the tools that they already know and love, like Tableau and Qlik and Power BI, but how are they going to use those tools to access the data in MongoDB? And for this, we have the business intelligence connectors. So this deploys a service for you that offers an SQL interface where these BI tools can connect to, query the data in MongoDB via SQL, and then connect the data to other data sources that you might have in the company to get insights between those. And now the last very important aspect is also security. Obviously, we don't want anyone to get access to our data. So with the high security requirements, you can also manage your own encryption keys. So if you have a key management service in one of the 3 cloud providers, you can just connect those to your Atlas account, and then those keys are used to encrypt the data at rest from MongoDB Atlas. And you also have the power to rotate the keys as you like, according to your specifications. All right, and that's basically it. So the basic capabilities of deploying a cluster in MongoDB Atlas. Now, there's a lot more that I can't cover in this talk, but one thing that I do like to cover is the data platform aspect. So, as I mentioned before, we try to build as many tools as possible into the database itself. And with MongoDB Atlas, one very important feature that we see more and more recently is a full text search. So with modern applications, you always want, or almost always want, to have like a search bar where people can just enter text. You want fuzzy search, you want autocomplete, and many more features. And for this, we built a fully featured Apache Lucene index into the MongoDB API. So it's working on the data in Atlas. It creates an Apache Lucene index. You can immediately query it with the tools you're already using. And now there's also going to be a talk about this after lunch, I believe. Another very important feature is archival. So thinking about the financial use case again, our data set is growing and growing and growing, but we might only want to keep like the last year of data very hot and accessible very quickly, but the rest of the data we just need to keep for regulatory purposes, or maybe it's just not queried as often. And for this, we have different archival options that we offer. I'm just going to cover these quickly because my colleague Marco is going to have a talk on that also at the end of the day for the German-speaking audience. But the options that we have reach from querying your data across MongoDB and S3 buckets by the same interface to an automated solution where you have data in MongoDB and it's automatically phased out to cheap object storage, and also an object storage that is optimized for analytical queries. Now, to finish the whole story about the application hosting off, we also have Atlas App Services. So this gives you everything that you need in order to have a fully featured app hosting experience. So this includes triggers. So if you want to react to changes in your data and you want to execute custom logic on top of it, this would be the way to go. Additionally, there are also different APIs, like a GraphQL API or a REST API that you can deploy there as well. You have different data access rules that you can define, so you can specify which users have access to which documents individually, and many more features, and there's also going to be a talk on this later on. And now to round the whole application story off, we also have Realm Mobile Database. So this is really suited to the mobile use cases where you have an application on your phone, for example, and you want an offline-first experience. So thinking about the transaction application again, you might want to do a bank transfer, and then while you're doing it, you lose connectivity, but you still want that bank transfer to go through as soon as connectivity comes back online. And this is something we can do with this. So with the MongoDB cluster in Atlas as a single source of truth and the local database on your phone, Atlas Device Sync is actually going to automatically copy the data or synchronize the data between the 2 devices all the time. So you don't need to manage any of these sync tools yourself, and it's also resolving conflicts automatically for you as they arise. Now, as a summary, we can say that MongoDB Atlas really is a MongoDB at its core, with loads of different data models built around it and loads of different features and functions built on top of it into the same API, so you as a developer are as efficient as possible. But everything built on top of the foundations of the cloud by being secure and scalable worldwide and benefiting from all of the automation aspects that you have there as well. So I basically reached the end of my talk. Again, I would like to remind you that it would be great if you could leave some feedback on this session. So tell us everything we did well or anything we could improve in the future. And with this, thank you very much. Oh, sorry, I'm going to leave the QR code for you.
Thank you, Philipp. Thank you so much. So now I think everyone is excited to try the MongoDB Atlas themselves. You can do it. Just one question, Philipp. What if you want to migrate your database from AWS to Azure? Is it possible?
Yeah, so I mentioned a couple of things that you could do while being in this configuration interface. Everything that I did there, you can just go ahead later as well into the configuration. and change any aspect. And one of those aspects is just changing the cloud provider. So what happens in the background is with the replica set, you just move node by node to a different cloud provider. So when all of the nodes are migrated, you're just with a different cloud provider. It's as easy as that.
So you even don't realize the change under the hood.
Yeah, no, it's still a MongoDB,
Like
it's just somewhere else.
All right, sounds good. Thank you so much, Philipp. That was really
Thank you.
great.